Sandra. Thanks so much for joining in today. Today, I wanted to share with you some of the statements that I get from a lot of um, people that I work with who have chronic health conditions um, and just feel very, very sick and not well. And typically, these things are. Um, my heart always goes out to these people, and I've been one of these people, and I know how frustrating and just totally defeated that you can feel going around in the medical community trying to get help. So I just wanted to share this with you. If this is you and you are experiencing chronic health conditions, particularly if you are a trauma survivor, an abuse survivor, most common conditions that you're going to see are anxiety, depression. You're also going to see chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, as well as autoimmune diseases. The problem is that most people, when they go to the physicians, they go to their general practitioner. Um, and so the general practitioner's job, and they typically will state this, is that they're like the gatekeeper. They're there to figure out where to send you to a specialist, or if there's a big problem that needs to be delved into deeper. So typically, if you have a lot of vague symptoms, you have systemic body pain, you have numbness and tingling, you have exhaustion. These things are, especially if it's chronic, these things are not dealt with very well in the medical community. And there's a couple of reasons for that. More because their training is more a little bit more on the acute, um, and also those things are heavily overlapped in so many different conditions and dysfunctions of the body. So I hear a lot from patients who have had chronic illness. They have kind of run the gauntlet of the medical community. They've gone to rheumatologists, they've gone to gastroenterologists, they've gone to Lyme specialists, they've gone to all these people. Um, and so typically, they kind of run the gauntlet, and they're just like, well, I think, am I going to have to feel like this forever? Am I just crazy? I must be just crazy. It just must be all in my head. And particularly this is, if patients are trauma survivors, specifically of, emotional and psychological abuse, um, they already have a tendency to blame themselves or think that they're making it up or exaggerating and everything, because they might have been taught that, any sort of complaint or need or want might have been like a big deal, or you're making a big deal out of it. So that's something to keep in mind. So sometimes, when a patient goes around the system and they're just looking for, diagnostic material, um, typically with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, you're not necessarily, it's going to be rare that you're going to find a large diagnosis slapping you in the face. And that's why it's so challenging within the medical community. And give me a thumbs up or comment below if you guys know how that feels, to kind of go through the gauntlet, and you're like almost hoping that you find something. You're like, tell me something's wrong, tell me it's like, you know cancer or something awful, and like you don't really want it to be that. You're like, I just need an answer, like what is wrong, how do I fix this, right? You're not really looking for something bad to be there, but you're almost like hoping that there's some sort of answer so you can do something about it, right? And then it's like your labs come up normal, and once again you're just kind of like, okay, what is going on with my body, right? This can be very, very defeating, particularly for somebody who's, been challenged with a lifetime of trauma. They're going to um, doubt themselves much more. Okay. Um, So, my answer to patients who I see who come in this condition, um, is absolutely, no, it's not something you just have to learn to live with, and suffer. B, or two rather, there are answers. Never give up on looking for answers. You may have to get down from the tree you've been barking up and bark up another tree, but there's always different, things out there to help you. And three, I don't believe, if anybody has ever said to you, this is all in your head, um, I don't care if it's you know, a medical provider, a nurse, or anything else. Um, that truly is an abusive statement, and to diminish and make somebody feel like they're going crazy because they're experiencing something is very, very wrong, just because you don't understand it or you can't find an answer. Okay. So I just want to make that very clear. What typically should happen is, a provider saying, like, I don't, like, everything's coming up normal, not sure what's wrong. Um, and yes, some of it might be a psychosomatic type of, sometimes with survivors, we can get psychosomatic type of, symptomology presenting as, or psychological stress presenting as somatic pain. It doesn't mean that it's all in your head. It just means that it's not found on lab work. Okay. So whatever you're experiencing, it's very real, right? So that's kind of the point I want to get across, not to villainize, other providers or anything like that, or if you know um people in my field as well, whoever it may be you might be talking to, um the statement, it's all in your head, is very wrong. Okay. So please know that whatever you're experiencing, there are answers to it. Okay. And whether or not it is coming from a somatic type of reflex or a psychological origin, it doesn't mean that you're not feeling it, or you're making things up, or it's not as bad as you say it is. Okay. So I just want to throw that on the table because that's a big concern for people who have felt like this chronic, um, exhaustion and pain and systemic body pain. I feel like that can, the level of defeat that they can get to because they've been told that, feels like, well, I'm never going to get answers and I'm just a big complainer, and the patient can take that on. Okay. And that's the last thing you want, especially with somebody who is a survivor who's trying to get help, and then that happens. It's almost like a secondary gaslighting of, like, oh my God, like I just shouldn't have gone for help, right? So, um, those of you who are listening who have experienced that, um, it's more common than you think, unfortunately. Okay. So secondly, typically one of the reasons for this, is because, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, all those conditions that present with, a lot of intense symptoms that are very vague, can have layers and layers of issues, right? So some of them can be, um, and this is typically with, most people that, I've worked with. I've never worked with somebody with a complex health issue that it was just like, boom, there it is. That's the answer. There's like only one answer, and, um, we're going to go after that and solve it. And that's not necessarily the case, right? Some of it is working through layers of, um, years of systemic body dysfunction. Okay. So we're looking at, levels of adrenal issues. We're looking at levels of, vitamin deficiencies. Or also, if there's a developmental trauma, there's also a, more of a risk for, there are more risks for psychological, problems such as like CPTSD or dissociative type of disorders, which basically means that there's coping mechanisms for the patient to kind of tuck away scary or traumatizing things that have happened to them into little boxes in their mind. And so typically, if you were somebody who experienced that, it's a very normal coping mechanism. And when your body is ready to start dealing with that, it will start to come forward more. Okay. So that's what typically I mean also by like developmental trauma survivors or abuse survivors, things that happen like chronically throughout your youth. One thing to note is that, these patients can come in with, a lot of times like PTSD from this type of stuff. And really, um, the biggest thing with patients and why I say it's so dangerous for people to say it's inside somebody's head is because the biggest thing that a trauma survivor with chronic health issues needs to do is continue to feel healthy and safe within their own skin and body. They may have had experiences that were so traumatizing or scary that they had to develop other coping mechanisms to survive, right? If somebody was older and trauma happens, not necessarily as much. When they're younger, that's when things kind of get blurry and stored differently. Okay. But those things can also translate into issues that are more psychosomatic. Again, when somebody is told that it's in their head, what can happen is that can exacerbate any sort of anxiety or PTSD or dissociative symptoms. If a patient has already been down that road, or they're just starting to figure out that they're a trauma survivor and they try to get help and they're met with that, that can be extremely, extremely detrimental, and that can create almost like that can create more depression or even make a patient to a point where they're like at a very risky level, depression wise, of suicide rates and such. So it's very important, especially if there's any physicians watching this, please validate your patients' experiences. Um, you know, People reaching out for help, they need care, they need nurturance, they need somebody to listen and to validate them, even if it's not understood. They need some sort of direction, they need answers. And so it kind of in the model that we're given, which is like the 5-minute appointment, the medical system, obviously, like I'm not a big fan, right? I've been down that road. I've been down it with my family. I've been down it when I watched a loved one die when they were younger and how they were treated in it, and how it's set up in the model frustrates me because there's not time to understand, there's not time to go through what you need to do, and it's set up for this, like, it's just such high volume setup with this model. um, so there's a lot to the functional medicine model I really like because it really takes into consideration the entire patient and not just what their diagnosis might be, but really like kind of an upstream model of medicine, which is looking at their functionality. So how is this patient functioning day in and day out? How are all of their systems functioning together, right? So physiologically, we have multiple different body systems that all try to work together to create homeostasis in our physical body, as well as our mind, as well as our spirit, right? So we are truly complex beings. So to say that there's only one answer, one diagnosis to chronic issues, I think is a disservice to patients. It's very important to get down to the root cause of what's going on with a patient. So, if you are somebody who has experienced that, what I would highly suggest is the first thing that I might suggest would say, please take a look at your health history line and start to look back when and how you started feeling certain symptoms. And this is usually where I start with people. really taking a look back on when things started, where you were living, what was going on, what type of diet you had, were you driving, were you in, this is the kind of stuff that gives me at least the most clues when working with people, because sometimes it's not just a something that's going to pop out in a diagnosis manual. Sometimes it's an overload of yeast in the patient's gut from eating too much, chocolate for a long period of time. They had one infection back in 2016. They had to go in for IV antibiotics, right? Didn't feel the same since. All of a sudden, their fatigue started getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And then they started craving chocolate more. And then they started going downhill from there. So just something like that makes me think, oh, this person had their gut microbiome like wiped out. Okay, they have way more opportunity for pathogens to get in their gut. Okay, I know there's a lot of the gut brain axis that is heavily linked together. That's when their depression started more. Is it that, or is it they tried to go in to somewhere medically and then they were met with this type of a situation, and then they started to feel more hopeless, and then their depression got worse. So again, it's one of those things where, and then they were more isolated, and then they were isolated in a home that had mold, and there was chronic mold toxicity that they were breathing in. So these things are so important, like knowing the patient and the patient's history and an extensive knowledge of what the patient's life looks like is so important. It's so important. It's important to know where the patient resides, their relationships, what their habits are, their exercise. Like all those things are really important, because they all contribute to the layers of chronic illness, right? And so the beauty about um, unraveling chronic illness is that there's usually multiple roots, but it's like peeling an onion. It's peeling an onion back, right? The more layers that we discover, usually they lead into other layers that we can get um, you know, the patient feeling better. So I hope you found that at least validating and helpful. I work under the model of functional medicine. I worked virtually with clients to help patients with specifically people who are trauma survivors or chronic abuse survivors, because I understand the level of complexity that comes with being a trauma survivor, as I am one myself, and the level of um, different types of layers the patients will present with. Okay. And then also how to look at and unravel what might be physically going on with that person, you know. And so typically with this type of model and patients who are interested um, in consulting, this is how we start. We start with a very detailed health history, a very detailed health history form, a multitude of regular labs, but then a multitude of functional labs. And I don't think I can share my screen. Can't share my screen. Um, I think on the next video, what I'm going to do is go over some of the functional labs with you guys to show you exactly like the kinds of stuff that I uncover with patients that can be super, super helpful and just life changing to a patient to have validation and answers that they've been sick for so long. Some people actually develop chronic, PTSD just from medical issues and having medical issues for so long and surgeries or things like that. Like that can be very traumatic for people as well. So, it's there's the message I want to get across is that um, everybody, whatever your symptoms are and what you're feeling, is this is not an in your head type of thing. That is, if any physician has ever, um, you know, or nurse or any medical staff have ever said that, that can be. I just want to validate that part of you that is probably feeling like defeated and crazy that, like, okay, am I complaining over nothing? Do I really have a problem? Is it all in my head? And questioning yourself. Um, it's not, what that really translated to was the person didn't know the answer, and didn't have a clear cut description of, or understand, or have answers to what you needed. Okay. um, but instead of saying that, it was twisted onto you. Okay. So that's really important to understand. And then the second part is, don't give up hope. There are many different other realms of medicine, um, to investigate, and other ways to look at the body, to try and get yourself better. Self healing is really powerful. Um, Particularly, I talk with patients about something called epigenetics. Our disease genes can be turned on and off through expression. And so if you were somebody who was brought up in a poor environment, um, that their environment was, you didn't get either the nutrition you needed, or um, your environment was more of a traumatic or scary one. Your what you eat, what you see, what your habits are, really determine what gene expression goes off in your body. And so if you can understand, this is why a trauma survivor has so much more risk of chronic disease, is because the things that they may have needed, they weren't able to get. Even if it was somebody of, trauma in a very, very low income area, or somebody of like a hurricane, disaster, and what they weren't there, they lost their home, they weren't able to get food, things like that. So that kind of stress really kicks off our disease genes. Okay, so there's ways to combat that, and there's ways to rewire. If you are somebody who really resonates with what I'm saying, first of all, I'm going to give you a big virtual hug, because I know how tough it can be. And second of all, if you need extra help, or you would like somebody to go over your case with you, I'm happy to do that. You can go to my website. I will post it below. You can schedule a virtual consultation with me. And from there, basically, everything is on my website that describes what the appointments are like. And I will send you an patient intake. But I think it's really important. Um, I think it's really important for you guys to know that there is hope. And in patients who I've seen, cases are very layered and very bad. I've seen cases turn around. So don't ever give up hope. And I hope that that was helpful for you and gave you some more clarity or information about what might have been happening, when you were going into those appointments, coming out feeling defeated. So um, keep fighting, and keep looking for answers. And I'm happy to help. If you are somebody who resonates with this, please go online and book an appointment, or message me, and I'd be happy to answer questions. I'm Dr. Misty Kosciuszko. Thank you so much for joining again on Wellness Wednesday, and I'll see you guys next week.